Thank you once again for joining the DRM Talks session on Oracle Primavera Cloud, specifically the scheduling module. My name is Thomas Cutting. I am a senior project controls consultant with DR McNatty, and I've had the opportunity to work with several clients to enhance and build out and even implement their OPC environment. Before we get started, I want to state that what I say today is intended for informational purposes only and may not align with Oracle's plans or direction for their product. I'll give you a second to read through the safe harbor statement from Oracle. The agenda for today. Today, obviously, I'll be discussing OPC scheduling. Oracle Primavera Cloud is a full project lifecycle application that enables the planning, tracking, and management of projects, portfolios, and programs. It enables schedule, resource, cost, file, and risk management. It's based on and integrates directly with Oracle's Primavera P6 platform. In this DRM talk, I will be focusing on the schedule management topics specifically of navigation, schedule overview, work breakdown structure, activities, relationships, scheduling, baseline scenarios, views, collaboration, all those things you would expect to see in a scheduling management tool. So now I'm going to switch to the actual application, and this will be a live demonstration. We're starting out here in the dashboard for what we call a workspace. A workspace is one of the fundamental pieces of OPC. They organize the projects and provide context for programs and portfolios. They form a hierarchical structure, allowing projects to be grouped by business area, department, project type, or other divisions. Each workspace can be customized with different settings and custom codes, fields specific to that group. This is a typical dashboard view for that. You can see I've got access to see specific projects, how many projects, the budgets, the risks, and departments that are part of this overall. This is our city edge, so it's a demonstration of a city government, for example, with departments in street, intake, legal, information services. And so each one of these would be their own separate workspace with projects and portfolios underneath those as well. The navigation side, in the upper left-hand corner, you'll see a main menu option. If I select that, that's going to allow me access to the different apps within, in this case, the workspace. So I can switch to the workflows, I can switch to resources in each one of those. At the top, we have a navigation that allows us to go to different aspects of the project, different objects. So I can go, here's the workspaces, I can go directly to a workspace, or I can switch to a portfolio program. I'm going to go into the projects, and I'm going to select the soccer complex remodel. Again, we land in the dashboard side here. I'm going to use that main menu at the upper left-hand corner and select Schedule Activities. Going to revert to the current schedule. That's where I want to start at. We'll talk about scenarios when we get to that toward the end here. So as you can see, the schedule has a pretty traditional look and feel to it with the work breakdown structure and the activities. Table side on this side. We have a Gantt chart on the right-hand side. And then if I select a specific activity, you can see the details for that activity at the bottom. It mirrors the Primavera P6 style and functionality, which makes sense because it's built on that same scheduling engine as Primavera P6, and they modeled that after this. I would say that OPC is effective for both small and large projects. I've got a client that has projects well over 1,000 lines that they are using this on, and it works quickly, easily, manages that simply. In this traditional view, you've got the table side where you can add additional columns. The Gantt chart allows you to add different bars to it and color code those appropriately. And then the details section at the bottom. Let's talk about the work breakdown structure. So the work breakdown structure, if I use the main menu again, I can go to the schedule WBS. So just like in Primavera P6, the WBS is maintained separately. And then I can add additional levels to this. I can add a child WBS to this and build this out to the level of detail that I need to organize and direct my project appropriately. I can also reposition that, move it up and down, insert it, outdent it to make that structure the way I need it to be made. I'm going to go ahead and delete this. I don't need that in there. So I'm going to remove that. And then let's go back to the activities window. The activities window is where the planning and tracking of the project is performed. Activities are added to the WBS, so I can come into anywhere in the WBS here and add an activity. That activity would then be given a duration. It would be linked, as you see these other activities linked to predecessors, successors. And then once scheduled, that would provide a timeline and a critical path for the project. Activities types are the same as they are in Primavera P6. If I come down to the lower section here, the details, I can select the type. You'll see we've got activity dependent, resource dependent, level of effort, start and finish milestones, and then the work breakdown summary types. To status activities, as we go through it, you'd come in and you'd click on the start and give it a start date for that. And if it's finished, you can go ahead and click on the finish and supply a finish date for it as well. For those activities that aren't finished, you can use the expected finish date to indicate when that activity is supposed to be completed. Or you can use the remaining duration and add additional days or remove additional days to that activity's length. So very typical use of scheduling activities to manage the progress of your project. Talk about relationships for a second. So relationships define the activity dependencies and lay out the sequence of the work to be performed by defining the predecessors and successors. In OPC, those relationships can be defined by either clicking on the end of an activity, either the start or the finish of it, and dragging down to the next activity where you want that to be placed. And that will draw out that line. See, that adds that in there. I can also add, if I go to, let's say, obtaining permits. You see that the obtaining permits has two predecessors and one successor. I can add to that either the predecessor or successor by popping up the list of all of the activities and then selecting the appropriate activity to link that to. And then each one of those relationships can be defined using the standard relationship types: start to start, start to finish, finish to start, and finish to finish. Once scheduled, these relationships dictate the order the activities are to be managed, are to be run, and define the critical path from that. Once you've gone through this exercise, you've gone through and added all of the activities, and you have defined the durations of those activities, as well as the sequence of them with the predecessors and successors. Then we can go ahead and schedule the project. Schedule tool actually begins with activities without predecessor and then develops the timeline of the project. So what this will do once we schedule it is going to take all those activities that either are at the very beginning of the project, there's no predecessors at those, or if during the course of the project you have an activity that all of the predecessors have been completed, and it'll start with that activity and schedule forward. The scheduling settings allow the user to alter how the schedule engine manages certain aspects of the project. Like, for example, what do I do with activities that started early? You know, the old retain logic, progress override. So that's setting here. And then also maybe if I want to include relationships to and from other projects, then I can select that option as well. All of these settings are specific to the project that I have open. So if I had more than one project open, I could drop down here and select the settings that I want to use. But again, these are specific to this project, and we'll stay with that if I save that. Each activity is assigned a start date based on the predecessor relationship. And then the duration dictates the finish date for that. So we start with an activity, assign it a start date, determine the finish date based on the duration. Then the relationship to the next activity is determined, and the same thing is done. Based on that relationship, we have a start date, the duration dictates the finish date, and that process continues throughout the project until we get to the end of it. Now, Primavera Cloud does a forward pass first to get the finish state, and then it also performs a backward pass using the finish date or using a must finish by date. It then goes backwards, establishing the finish date for the activity and subtracting out the duration to get the start date for that activity. So the forward pass will give you an early start and finish date. What's the earliest this activity can start and finish? The backward pass gives you the late start and finish dates. What's the latest this activity can finish or start without impacting the end of the project? And so by using the early dates and the finish and the late dates, the scheduling tool can then calculate the total float for those activities, right? So what that's telling me is an activity may be able to start on Monday, but it's not going to impact the project if it doesn't start until Wednesday. So that'll give me that total float. In that case, would be 2 days of float, in which that activity doesn't have to start. And if it doesn't, then it won't impact the project schedule until Wednesday on that. So that gives us the total float on that. Based on that total float, the difference between the early and late dates would be the total float. It can determine the critical path. So obviously all of those activities that have a 0 or less total float would then be on the critical path. Okay. So once we've gone through and established the schedule, we've gone through and run the scheduling tool, we can then take a baseline of the project. So if I look at the main menu and go down to baselines, this project I've actually established a couple of different baselines. There would be the original contract baseline, that's the first part of the project. And then we might have the current baseline, whatever the current agreed upon values are for the project. And then I have what we call supplementary baseline. So that's something that hasn't been assigned yet. So I can have multiple baselines for the project. Technically, I can have as many as I want. And I can add new ones. So a baseline is a point-in-time capture of the project schedule. It can be used to measure the progress against the current run of the project, current values, to determine if you are ahead or behind in both schedule and cost. So I can create a baseline and I can actually create that as either original, current, or supplemental. But I can pick a source for that as either my current schedule, the current one I have displayed, a scenario, a different baseline, or unique to OPC is creating it from history. What this allows me to do is pick a date throughout the course of the project, even back to the very beginning of the project, and set that baseline to that date. That means it's going to go back in time, determine what the project schedule looked like on that date, and make a copy of it as a baseline. So I could be 3 weeks into my project and say, oh, I never took an actual baseline for my project. So I can go back in time and select the very beginning of the project, and that will return a baseline with the schedule exactly the way it was at the time of the beginning of the project. So that is something that's very unique to OPC and allows us to create that baseline based at any point during the project. Baselines then can be used if I go back to my activities window and I select the, let's see if I go to a view, let's do the baseline analysis view. So you can see here the baseline analysis view has both the dates from the baseline, but it also has the baseline bar. So I can quickly determine that in this case, let's see, the finalized bid documents is taking a lot longer than we anticipated. If this blue line represents our baseline, this is what it was supposed to take. You can see how the project has slipped based on that going forward. In addition to baselines, OPC also has what they call scenarios. So I can create a scenario. If I go to Actions, Add Scenario, and it's very similar to a baseline. I can pick a point in time or the current schedule to create a scenario based on that. If I can do the history, I can go back in time to pick a specific time for that. What a scenario does is gives me the opportunity to do a what if. I've got an example of one here. I can actually switch between my current schedule and either a scenario or a baseline. And I'm going to pick the risk mitigation scenario. So I go ahead and open that. This allows me to do is for a specific risk, for example, that is impacting the project, I can go through and update the activities in kind of a what if scenario so that I can say, okay, if we take these actions, if we add these activities, this is how it's going to impact the overall project schedule. And that can be reviewed and people can look at it and say, okay, that makes sense. Let's go ahead and switch to this project. So I can actually make this scenario then the current project, or take pieces of this and add it to the current project schedule, and incorporate what I designed out here into the current schedule going forward. It's a very powerful tool, allows us to do that. What if scenarios, what if analysis of that, and then incorporate that back into the current schedule, move forward with it. So you saw me change the view. So I can create different views of the data, changing the columns, changing the Gantt chart to display different information. If I go into the manage views, you'll see I can change the columns, add different columns to the table side. I can group this differently. If I want to group it instead of the work breakdown structure, if I wanted to group it by some other indicator, maybe the activity status, or maybe a user-defined field like vendor, I can group it that way and change the bars, what's defined there as well. So different things. And I can save that as either a standard for all projects within the system or specific to the workspace. And then I can also have a personal views that I can use for my own personal use. In addition to that, I can change the layout. So the layout right now is showing the Gantt. I can remove the Gantt and just show the table. Good for instances where I have a ton of user-defined fields or different fields that I want to display. Then I don't necessarily need the Gantt to review that project based on that. I can also show the activity network diagram and work through that, picking out specific sections of that and displaying those. And at the lower level, we go back to the Gantt chart. In the lower level, I can display the project usage instead of the resource usage, instead of the oh, I'm in the what if statement still. We switch this back to the current project. So I can show the usage in the lower section as well. So activity usage, there we go. And planned labor, period actual labor, all of those data is displayed at the bottom level. Go back to the activities details on that. The topic I want to talk about is the collaboration side. So there's a couple of different aspects of that. One is right here in the activities window. You see this column here that has the discussion bubble. If I click on one of those, you can see that I can add comments to this, and other people can comment on this as we go through the project and update that information. So you're actually communicating back and forth about that specific activity. Another aspect of this at the project level, collaboration, is, if I go to the home page, the ability to follow this or make it one of my favorite projects. If I follow it, then I get messages in my inbox every time somebody makes an update to this. So the inbox will actually show the details of what has changed as we go through the course of the project. So those are the topics I wanted to cover on the scheduling module of Oracle Primavera Cloud. So upcoming DRM Talk series will continue with the introduction to Oracle Primavera Cloud. In February, we'll be doing risk management. And then in March, we'll be doing task management. So the risk management is very robust, allows you to analyze your risks, identify your risks, mitigate those risks, graphically show the impact to your project. And then the task management allows you to break down your project into specific tasks. So some of the longer activities, here we see site preparation, remove debris, install fencing, and then assign those tasks to different vendors, to different companies, and then draw that out. So if that's interesting to you, you can come back in March and we'll talk about that.